The morning of my wedding arrived with soft sunlight spilling through the curtains, painting golden patterns across the room. It should have been one of the happiest mornings of my life, and in many ways it was. Yet beneath the excitement, beneath the smiles and congratulations, there was something else quietly sitting in my chest. Fear. Not fear of marriage, not fear of commitment. I loved the man I was about to marry with all my heart. He was my safe place, my best friend, the person who made life feel lighter even on the hardest days. No, the fear came from somewhere else. My family. More specifically, the possibility of drama. As I stood in front of the mirror that morning, carefully getting ready, I couldn't stop replaying different scenarios in my head. I knew most brides worried about things like rain, late guests, forgotten rings, or dresses getting stained. My worries were different. I was worried about people. I was worried about boundaries being ignored. I was worried about old wounds being reopened on a day that was supposed to mark a new beginning. A few days earlier, my husband and I had decided to keep the ceremony small and intimate. We would have a simple celebration after the registry office and save the larger reception for later. It felt perfect. Less pressure, less stress. Just the people who genuinely cared about us. At least, that was the plan. As I finished getting ready, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages. Congratulations, heart emojis, photos, good wishes, friends from different parts of the world sending love and excitement. Each message made me smile. Each message reminded me that there were people in my life who respected me, supported me, and accepted me exactly as I was. But then my thoughts drifted towards someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my sibling. For the sake of this story, let's call them Gray. Even thinking about that name made my stomach tighten. Years ago, I had made one of the most difficult decisions of my life. I cut contact with Gray completely. People often imagine that family estrangement happens because of a single argument, one dramatic fight, one misunderstanding, one moment of anger. But real life rarely works that way. Sometimes the decision comes after years of hurt, years of disappointment, years of feeling unseen, unheard, or repeatedly wounded by someone who should have cared about you. The choice wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. And after countless attempts to fix things, I finally accepted that some relationships simply cannot be repaired by one person alone. So, I walked away. I deleted Gray from social media, blocked their number, stopped responding, said everything I needed to say, closed the door. Or at least I thought I had. The problem was that Gray never accepted my decision. Not once. Not ever. No matter how clear I was, no matter how many years passed, no matter how many boundaries I set, Gray always found another way to push back into my life. And unfortunately, they had help. My parents. Now, I don't think my parents were trying to be cruel, at least not intentionally. I think they simply hated the idea that their children weren't speaking. They wanted everything to go back to normal. The problem was that normal had never actually been healthy. But they refused to see that. Instead, they treated my boundaries like temporary obstacles, something to overcome, something to fix, something to wear down over time. Every holiday became a risk. Every birthday became a risk. Every family gathering became a risk. At any moment, someone could pull out a phone and suddenly Gray would appear on the screen. Surprise! Just talk to them. Just say hello. Just give them another chance. As if years of pain could magically disappear after a 5-minute conversation. As if forgiveness could be forced. As if healing worked that way. The worst part was the ambushes. My parents became experts at creating them. They would wait for moments when it felt impossible to refuse. Moments when other people were watching. Moments when saying no would make me look unreasonable. They would corner me in rooms, hand me a phone, and act as though the conversation had already been agreed upon. The pressure was overwhelming every single time. And every single time, I still said no. Because once you learn how important boundaries are, you realize that protecting them is not selfish. It's necessary. Unfortunately, every refusal only seemed to encourage them to try harder. As the wedding approached, my anxiety grew. Not because I expected disaster, but because experience had taught me something important. People who don't respect boundaries rarely stop because of special occasions. In fact, special occasions often make them try even harder. The week before the ceremony, I found myself lying awake at night, imagining different possibilities. What if someone brought up Gray? What if my parents tried to surprise me with a call? What if they thought my wedding was the perfect opportunity for a family reconciliation? The more I thought about it, the more realistic those possibilities seemed. Eventually, I sat down with a notebook. If I couldn't control what other people did, maybe I could control how I responded. So I started making lists. Possible problems, possible reactions, possible solutions. It sounds simple, but writing everything down helped. Instead of being trapped inside my anxiety, I was creating a plan, a strategy, a way to protect my peace. One particular scenario stayed at the top of the page. My parents trying to force contact with Gray during the wedding. The idea felt ridiculous. Who would do that? Who would turn a wedding into a family intervention? And yet, deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it might actually happen. The thought followed me all the way to the registry office. As I stood beside the man I loved, listening to the words that would officially join our lives together, I tried to focus on the moment, the future, the promises, the happiness. And for a while, I succeeded. Nothing else mattered. Not family drama, not old wounds, not difficult memories. Just us. Just this moment. Just the beginning of a new chapter. For the first time all day, I felt calm. I felt hopeful. I felt free. But I had no idea that before the evening was over, one of my biggest fears was about to become reality. The celebration began quietly, exactly the way we had hoped. After the registry office, our small group gathered together to eat, laugh, and enjoy the evening. The atmosphere felt warm and comfortable. Conversations flowed naturally from one table to another. People shared stories, raised glasses, and offered their heartfelt congratulations. For the first time in weeks, I started to relax. Maybe I had worried too much. Maybe my anxiety had created problems that didn't actually exist. Maybe this day would pass peacefully after all. I looked around the room. My husband was talking with a few guests, smiling in that calm way that always made me feel safe. Blue was nearby, chatting with friends. My parents seemed relaxed as well. Everything appeared normal. For a little while, I allowed myself to enjoy being a bride. I allowed myself to enjoy the happiness surrounding me. The tension that had been sitting in my chest for weeks slowly began to loosen. Then I noticed something. My father had disappeared. At first, I didn't think much about it. People moved around all evening. Some stepped outside, some went to the restroom. Some took phone calls. Nothing unusual. A few minutes later, my mother also disappeared. That was strange. But still, I tried not to overthink it. I reminded myself that not everything was a warning sign. Not everything was a problem. Not everything was about Gray. Still, a small voice in the back of my mind began whispering, "Pay attention. Something feels off." I pushed the thought away. I wanted to enjoy my wedding. I wanted one evening without anxiety, one evening without preparing for conflict, one evening without needing to defend my boundaries. A guest was telling a funny story nearby, and everyone burst into laughter. I laughed too. For a moment, the uneasy feeling disappeared. Then I saw my parents returning. My father was holding his phone. My stomach dropped instantly. The feeling was immediate, like cold water being poured directly into my chest. I knew. Before I saw the screen, before anyone spoke, before a single word was said, I knew. Years of experience had trained me to recognize the signs. My father was smiling. Not a happy smile, not a relaxed smile, a determined smile. The kind of smile people wear when they're about to do something they already know you won't like. My heartbeat quickened. I looked toward my husband, almost instinctively, and that's when I remembered something. The night before the wedding, my notebook, my plans, my list. One of the items had been simple. If they try to force contact with Gray, stay calm. Do not explain. Do not argue. Just say no. At the time, it had felt like preparing for an unlikely disaster. Now it felt like the smartest thing I had ever done. My parents continued walking toward our table. The phone remained in my father's hand, screen facing outward. And then I saw it. Gray, right there, on the screen, thousands of miles away, yet suddenly standing in the middle of my wedding. My entire body froze, not because I wanted to talk, not because I missed them, not because I was surprised, but because trauma has a strange way of living inside the body. Even after years, even after distance, even after healing, sometimes one glance is enough to wake it up. My chest tightened. My hands felt cold. The room suddenly seemed louder. Every sound blended together. Voices, music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Everything became a blur. I wasn't looking at a screen anymore. I was looking at years of painful memories, years of disappointment, years of hurt, years of boundaries being ignored. And now here they were, again, on my wedding day, exactly as I had feared. My father stepped closer, 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 holding the phone out in front of him, as though presenting a gift, as though this was something I should be grateful for, as though this moment belonged to him. My mother stood beside him, watching, waiting, expecting. Around us, a few guests began noticing what was happening. The energy shifted. Conversations grew quieter. People looked over, trying to understand, trying to figure out why my expression had suddenly changed. I could feel panic beginning to rise. The familiar sensation, the one I had experienced before, the feeling that my choices were being taken away, the feeling of being cornered, the feeling that someone else had decided what was best for me. For a split second, I considered standing up and walking away. But before I could move, something happened. My husband shifted slightly in his chair. A tiny movement, almost invisible. Yet it changed everything. Without saying a word, he positioned himself directly between me and my parents. Not aggressively, not dramatically, simply there. A quiet wall of support. A reminder that I wasn't alone. A reminder that someone respected my boundaries even when others didn't. My father stopped. The phone remained extended. Gray stared silently from the screen, waiting, expecting, probably assuming that eventually I would give in. After all, that's what everyone wanted, right? A wedding, a happy occasion, a perfect opportunity for reconciliation. At least, that's how they probably saw it. But they didn't understand something. Reconciliation requires accountability. It requires respect. It requires change. You cannot force it into existence through surprise video calls. You cannot manufacture healing through pressure. And you certainly cannot ambush someone into forgiveness. The room felt completely still. Then my husband looked directly at the screen. His expression remained calm, steady, controlled. And slowly, deliberately, he shook his head. Just once. No. No speech, no argument, no anger. Just no. The simplicity of it stunned me, and somehow, seeing him do that gave me strength. I turned toward my parents. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Years of frustration, years of pressure, years of manipulation, years of ignored boundaries, all condensed into one moment, one word, one simple word. No. The room became silent. My father blinked. My mother stared. Gray remained frozen on the screen. I could feel everyone waiting for explanations, waiting for arguments, waiting for drama. But there was nothing else to say. My boundary had already been explained years ago. It had been explained dozens of times, maybe hundreds.
No further discussion was necessary. My father opened his mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to persuade, perhaps to guilt-trip me. I never found out, because before he could speak, I repeated it, even more firmly. No. And suddenly, everything changed. The second no seemed to hang in the air long after I had spoken it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For a brief moment, it felt as though the entire room had stopped breathing. My father stood frozen with the phone still in his hand. My mother looked back and forth between us. The guests nearest to our table quietly watched, unsure whether they should pretend nothing had happened or prepare for a confrontation. As for me, I felt strangely calm. Not comfortable, not happy, but calm. Because for the first time in years, I hadn't been trapped. I hadn't been cornered. I hadn't been forced into a conversation I never wanted. I had simply said no, and I meant it. The silence stretched on.
Then a sound broke through it. A child screaming. At first, I didn't realize where it was coming from. Then I recognized it. Gray's child. The sound echoed through the phone speakers from somewhere in the background. A loud, frustrated cry. The kind children make when they are tired, bored, or simply done with sitting still. It was oddly surreal. There we all were, standing in the middle of this incredibly tense moment, and the only person speaking was a child who had absolutely no idea what was happening. Nobody on the call said a word. Not Gray, not my parents, not me. Just the child. The screaming continued for several seconds before Gray finally shifted their attention away from the camera. And somehow that made the entire situation feel even stranger. My wedding, my celebration, my special day, reduced to a silent standoff over a phone screen, a standoff that should never have happened in the first place. Finally, my father lowered the phone. His face tightened immediately. The disappointment was obvious. The frustration was obvious. And beneath both of those emotions was something else. Anger. Not anger toward Gray, not anger toward the situation. Anger toward me, as though I have ruined something. As though I had been unreasonable, as though I was responsible for the awkwardness everyone was now feeling. My mother looked uncomfortable. She knew what had happened was wrong. I could see it in her expression. But she also knew there was no way to undo it now. The moment was over. The damage had already been done. Without another word, my parents walked away. The phone disappeared. The video call ended. The crisis, technically, was finished. But the emotional aftermath had only just begun. I felt my entire body trembling. Not visibly, not enough for anyone across the room to notice. But inside, every nerve felt stretched tight. The panic attack I had feared was knocking at the door. I could feel it approaching. The rapid heartbeat, the tight chest, the dizziness, the overwhelming urge to escape. For years, even seeing Gray's face unexpectedly had been enough to trigger those feelings. And now that face had appeared during one of the most important moments of my life. I lowered my eyes and focused on breathing. Slowly. In, out. In, out. Beside me, my husband quietly placed a hand over mine. No speeches, no questions, no pressure. Just support. That simple gesture grounded me. It reminded me where I was, who I was with, what day this was. I wasn't back in old family conflicts. I wasn't trapped in old memories. I was sitting beside my husband at our wedding celebration, and nobody could take that away from me. A few moments later, one of my closest friends approached the table. They didn't immediately ask questions. They didn't demand details. Instead, they sat beside me and simply said, "Do you want some fresh air?" The kindness in that question nearly made me cry. Not because of what they said, but because they gave me a choice, something my parents had refused to do. I nodded. A small group of friends quietly guided me outside. They were careful, discreet, respectful. Nobody wanted to turn the situation into gossip. Nobody wanted attention. Nobody wanted to create a bigger scene. Outside, the evening air felt cool against my skin. I took several deep breaths. The sky above was beginning to darken. A few stars had started appearing. For a moment, everything felt peaceful again. One friend handed me a bottle of water. Another wrapped an arm around my shoulder. Someone else made a joke so ridiculous that I couldn't help laughing. That laugh felt important, like refusing to allow the situation to steal my happiness completely. Eventually, I told them what had happened, not because they asked, because they already knew. Everyone close to me knew about Gray. They knew about the years of hurt. They knew about the boundaries. They knew about the anxiety. Most importantly, they respected my decision. Nobody tried to convince me otherwise. Nobody suggested reconciliation. Nobody told me I should forgive and forget. They simply listened. And listening can be one of the greatest gifts a person can offer. While we were outside, the celebration continued inside. Music played, guests talked, food was served. Life moved forward. And honestly, I was grateful for that. I didn't want my wedding to become defined by this incident. I didn't want the entire evening to revolve around family drama. I wanted it to remain what it was supposed to be, a celebration of love. After a while, I felt strong enough to return. When we walked back inside, several guests smiled warmly. A few squeezed my hand. Others gave me reassuring looks. Nobody mentioned the video call. Nobody forced me to relive it. Their silence was intentional, compassionate. They understood that support doesn't always require words. Meanwhile, my father had become noticeably distant. The cheerful mood he had earlier was gone. He sat quietly, spoke less, avoided eye contact. The failed ambush had clearly upset him. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it, because when people refuse to accept responsibility for their actions, They often look for someone else to blame. And before the night was over, my father found his target. Blue, my other sibling, the sibling who had also chosen to keep their distance from Gray, the sibling who understood exactly why I had made my decision. At some point during the evening, my father confronted Blue. I wasn't present for the entire conversation, but I heard enough later to understand what had happened. According to my father, none of this was really my decision. No, in his mind, someone must have influenced me. Someone must have poisoned my opinion. Someone must have manipulated me. And so he accused Blue. He claimed Blue had turned me against Gray, that Blue had filled my head with negativity, that Blue was responsible for the family division. It was completely untrue, but truth didn't seem to matter, because accepting reality would require acknowledging something painful, that two adult children had independently reached the same conclusion about Gray, and that possibility was apparently harder to accept than creating a villain. Blue, understandably, was hurt, furious, exhausted. After years of dealing with the same accusations, they were tired of carrying responsibility for problems they didn't create. And honestly, so was I. Watching the situation unfold filled me with sadness. Not because I doubted my decision. I didn't, not for a second. It saddened me because even on my wedding day, my family was repeating the exact same unhealthy patterns that had caused so much pain in the first place. Blame, denial, pressure, manipulation, the same cycle, over and over again. And standing there, surrounded by friends who respected me and family members who didn't, I began to realize something important. Sometimes the people who love you are not the people who understand you, and sometimes the people who understand you become your true family. That realization stayed with me for the rest of the evening. As the celebration continued, I found myself looking around the room differently, not through the lens of anxiety, not through the lens of disappointment, but through gratitude. The people surrounding me had shown me exactly who they were when it mattered most. Some had protected my peace. Some had offered comfort. Some had quietly stood nearby without demanding explanations. Some had made me laugh when I felt like crying. Every one of those actions mattered, more than they probably realized. The rest of the evening passed without any further incidents. No more surprise phone calls, no more attempts at reconciliation, no more family ambushes. Eventually, the music softened. Guests began saying their goodbyes. Hugs were exchanged, photos were taken, promises were made to meet again soon. Little by little, the room began to empty. The excitement of the day slowly gave way to exhaustion, the kind of exhaustion that follows a powerful emotional experience. My husband and I thanked everyone for coming. We smiled, we hugged people, we listened to their kind words, and despite everything that had happened, I realized something surprising. I was happy, truly happy. Not because the evening had gone perfectly. It hadn't. Not because there had been no conflict. There had. But because I had protected myself. For years, situations like this would have left me drowning in guilt, questioning myself, wondering if I should have handled things differently, wondering whether I had been too harsh, too stubborn, too unforgiving. This time was different. This time, I felt certain. My boundary had been reasonable. My response had been reasonable. And most importantly, I had honored my own needs. That certainty felt incredibly freeing. Later that night, after most of the guests had left, my mother approached me. I could tell immediately that something was different. Her expression had softened. The defensiveness I usually saw wasn't there. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she sighed, a long, tired sigh, the kind people make when they finally stop fighting reality. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Just those 2 words. Simple, direct, unexpected. I stared at her for a moment, not because I didn't hear her, because I wasn't sure I had. Apologies were rare, very rare, especially when it came to family matters. My mother looked down briefly before continuing. She admitted that what happened had been inappropriate. She admitted that the wedding had not been the right place, not the right time, not the right way. For a moment, I saw genuine regret in her eyes. And while that didn't erase what had happened, it mattered. Because accountability matters. Even small amounts of accountability matter. I took a deep breath. Then, for perhaps the first time in a long while, I spoke honestly, without trying to soften my words. I told her exactly how I felt. I told her how much anxiety I had carried before the wedding. I told her how frightened I had been that something like this would happen. I told her how deeply hurt I felt that my fears had become reality. I explained that seeing gray wasn't a neutral experience for me. It wasn't simply awkward. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was triggering, painful, overwhelming. I explained that boundaries are not punishments. They are protections. They exist because something has already gone wrong. And every time those boundaries were ignored, the wound reopened. My mother listened quietly. For once, she didn't interrupt. For once, she didn't defend anyone. For once, she simply listened. When I finished speaking, neither of us said much more. There wasn't really anything else to say. The conversation wasn't magical. It didn't fix years of problems. It didn't heal every family wound. It didn't suddenly change everything. Real life rarely works that way. But it felt important nonetheless. It felt like a small step toward understanding. Whether that understanding would last, I honestly didn't know. And maybe that was okay. Because another realization had begun settling inside me. I couldn't control whether my parents learned from this experience. I couldn't control whether they respected my boundaries in the future. I couldn't control whether Gray ever accepted my decision. Those things belonged to them, not me. The only thing I could control was how I responded. The only thing I could control was how I protected my peace. For years, I had spent enormous amounts of energy trying to manage other people's emotions, trying to avoid conflict, trying to prevent disappointment, trying to keep everyone happy. But somewhere along the way, I had learned an important lesson. You cannot sacrifice your well-being to make other people comfortable. At some point, you have to choose yourself. Not because you're selfish, because you're responsible for your own life. That night, after everyone had finally gone home, my husband and I sat together in exhausted silence. The kind of silence that exists between people who don't need constant conversation. Outside, the world was quiet. The excitement of the wedding had faded. The adrenaline had disappeared. Only stillness remained. I leaned my head against his shoulder. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled and said something that made me laugh. "You know," he said, "for a wedding disaster, that was a pretty boring disaster." I laughed harder than I had all day, because he was right. There had been no screaming match, no dramatic confrontation, no emotional explosion, no public scene. Just a phone, a boundary, and one very powerful word. No. Such a small word, only 2 letters. Yet sometimes it carries the weight of an entire lifetime. Sometimes no is an act of courage. Sometimes no is an act of healing. Sometimes no is how we protect the parts of ourselves that have already been hurt enough. As I sat there reflecting on the day, I thought about all the people who had supported me. My husband, Blue, my friends, the guests who quietly showed kindness when I needed it most. None of them had tried to control me. None of them had demanded anything from me. They had simply stood beside me. And perhaps that is what real love looks like. Not pressure, not guilt, not manipulation, not control. Real love respects boundaries. Real love listens. Real love makes space for healing. The wedding day eventually became a memory. Not a perfect memory, not an easy memory, but an important one. Because despite everything that happened, the day still belonged to us. Not to the drama, not to the conflict, not to the people who ignored our wishes. It belonged to us. To 2 people beginning a new chapter together. And when I think back on that evening now, I don't remember the phone call first. I don't remember the tension. I don't remember the disappointment. I remember the laughter, the hugs, the support, the feeling of my husband's hand holding mine. I remember the people who chose kindness, the people who chose respect, the people who reminded me that family is not always defined by blood. Sometimes family is built through trust, through loyalty, through understanding, through love. And if there is one lesson I carried away from that wedding, it is this. You do not get to choose the relatives you are born with, but you do get to choose the people you allow into your heart. Choose the people who respect your boundaries. Choose the people who protect your peace. Choose the people who stand beside you when life becomes difficult. Because when you surround yourself with the right people, even imperfect days can become beautiful memories. And sometimes Those beautiful memories are more powerful than all the pain that came before them.